Tom Minnery is the executive director of CitizenLink, and he has served as a steady voice articulating the conservative Christian viewpoint on family, marriage, and religious civil liberties. He's got his hands full with Obamacare, don't you know? His views and influence have helped to shape public policy at both the national and state levels. Tom oversees the network of 38 state-level family policy councils that have worked to affect the tone of national policy. Please help me welcome Tom Minnery.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning. Our panel is entitled, "Can Conservatives and Libertarians Ever Work Together?" That is a big, big topic. The differences between the two have been going on for a long time, and if we do our job right in the next hour, we will solve all of the problems between libertarians and conservatives, and we will unite the right. That's what we're about. And to do so, we have a perfect panel of people who are just eager to get into this. Let me introduce them, bring them out one by one. Our first guest is the chair for the Libertarian Party from 2000 to 2004, re-elected May 2012, member of the Libertarian National Committee for 5 terms, 2 years as the state chair for the Texas Libertarian Party. During his 30 years of Libertarian Party activism, he has worked to ensure that the Libertarian Party stays true to the principles of freedom, small government, non-interventionist foreign policy, and civil liberties. Please welcome Geoff Neale. Our next speaker is an adjunct fellow of the Kirby Center, which is the Washington office installation, the Washington installation of Hillsdale College. And this gentleman is also one of the senior leaders at the Heritage Foundation, been so for many years. He leads the First Principles Initiative at Heritage. He has taught at Hillsdale, George Mason University, the Catholic University of America, and Claremont McKenna College. He's also a contributor to Fox News. Please welcome Matthew Spalding. And finally, our third speaker is senior fellow at the Cato Institute, specializing in foreign policy and civil liberties. He worked as special assistant to President Reagan and an editor of the political magazine Inquiry. He writes regularly for leading publications such as Fortune magazine, National Interest, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Times. Please welcome Doug Bandow. Gentlemen, please take your seats and let me introduce what this is really all about. I work at CitizenLink, which is the public policy arm of Focus on the Family. So I am actually a social conservative, not just a conservative. And there is a whole lot about the libertarian platform that we love. The idea of reducing the size of government. Right on, everybody is with that. The idea that government should get out of the way, cut red tape so that entrepreneurs can create real jobs. We are all about that, every one of us in the room this morning. But there's a whole lot about human liberty with an emphasis on the human that makes some of us who are social conservatives a little bit concerned. For example, we see nothing in the libertarian platform about duty to our fellow citizens. There is no transcendent source of values for the cause of human liberty. And we look at that and we think, my goodness, you know, if a free country has got to be led by free people who have within them some kind of moral gyroscope to help them do not just what they want, but to help them to do what they ought. And in Western civilization, that inner moral gyroscope has come from a sense of virtue which emanates from biblical tradition, and we had wished and looked but could not find any sense of that in the Libertarian Party platform. And we think about Thomas Jefferson, who said, "It's the God who gave us life that gave us liberty." We believe that liberty is a gift from God. We don't see that in the libertarian platform. But we are blessed because we have the single most important guy in libertarian circles to explain, even to me, a social conservative, what I'm missing, why all of that isn't there. So please welcome to the platform the chairman of the Libertarian Party, Geoff Neale.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here. And I'm glad you started with a softball. But that's okay. The Libertarian Party has been around since 1971.
Yeah.
It was built on a very simple principle. The principle is liberty. At that time, there was an organization called YAF, Young Americans for Freedom. Some of the members of that group thought they were straying too far into the, well, let's call it social issues, and decided that what was needed was an organization that stressed liberty, total liberty, freedom to do as you want, as long as you respect the rights of others. One of our founding fathers of the Libertarian Party, in fact the most important one, David F. Nolan, who sadly passed away 3 years ago, created this little chart, a little test to differentiate people. And on this, based on how you answered questions of whether you should have the right to decide your life on economic issues or social issues, how you fit into a political spectrum. It's known as either the Nolan chart today or as the world's smallest political quiz. And basically people in the middle, we call those centrists. Okay, that's where a lot of people end up. People strong on social freedoms but not on economic freedoms, we call those Democrats. People who are strong on economic freedoms but not so much on the social issues, we call those Republicans. People who are strong on both we call libertarians, and people who are strong on neither we call those authoritarians. Now, the reason this was done in the very beginning was very simple. David Nolan wanted to make a differentiation. He said it's really not about left or right. It's about authoritarian versus libertarian. The difference is a government that can tell you how you can conduct your business can tell you how you can pray and what church you can go to. That the authority vested in a government to decide one portion of your life too often gives them the authority, or the mandate as they seem to think, to act in other avenues of the life. So that the only way to have a government that respects the rights of individuals is to have one that oppresses the least. Or as Jefferson said, that government that governs least governs best. He was a religious man. He led by example, however, not by governmental mandate. Well, now what we're seeing in today's world is really simple. Even Matt Drudge came out and said, it's not about Republican or Democrat anymore. It's about libertarian versus authoritarian. Because the power structure in in Washington, it's getting to be very difficult to distinguish between the Republicans and the Democrats. Why would we have a Tea Party or even a Libertarian Party if that wasn't true? So for libertarians, it's not about left or right. It really is about right or wrong. Thank you.
Good job.
Morning, how are you doing? Thanks, Tom. This is a great panel. Great to be with you. I commend CPAC and especially Al Cardenas. It's important to remember that the conservative movement rests on ideas. And once it forgets that, it will forget and lose its ability to influence politics and inspire the American people. I've been at Heritage Foundation for 20 years. I've actually recently crossed the street, literally. I'm now a Vice President Dean of Hillsdale College, one of the most principled colleges in the United States. I like to ask my students, by a show of hands, what kind of conservative are you? And so I ask them, how many are libertarians? How many are social conservatives? Theocons, any theocons? How about a neocon? Anybody a paleocon? How about a crunchy con? Crunchy cons are good on everything, but they're soft on the environment. Any crunchy cons? The point is, it's the wrong question. You ask what kind of conservative you are, you immediately divide yourself into a group. And we start squabbling with each other because you think it's an ideology. That's not the right question. The question is, what is it that we wish to conserve? And I would argue to you that that is our country. It's about America and its exceptional principles of liberty and the framework of law that protects the blessings of liberty. But I have to break it to you. I have to break it to you. The American founders believed in liberty, but they weren't libertarians. Liberty does not necessarily mean anarchy, and it does not mean atomistic individualism. But I must also add at the same time that while they were men of great faith and morals, they were not dogmatists either. We believe in the separation of church and state. It protects religious liberty for everybody and means that churches, as churches, can't tell us what laws to pass. Our founders believed in liberty and the rule of law just as their moral horizon was defined by the classical world and the world of Christian and Judeo-Christian values. Their conservatism, our conservatism, asserts self-evident truths according to the laws of nature and nature's God. It defends fundamental rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that were endowed by our Creator. It recognizes man's self-interest at the same time that it believes in his capacity for virtue. It limits government to the powers delegated to it in the Constitution at the appropriate level of government, at the same time that it makes sure government performs its proper job effectively and energetically. That's not libertarianism or social conservatism, my friends. That's American. That's what our conservatism is about. Can libertarians and social conservatives get along? Of course they can, as long as they remember that the true fusion of ideas is not a policy matter, it's a matter of principle. America's principles remind economic conservatives that morality is essential to limited government, just as it reminds cultural conservatives that unlimited government is a fundamental threat to moral self-government. America's principles were the key to Frank Meyer's fusionism. It was also the key to Ronald Reagan's robust conservatism. It can be that source of vitality again. My friends, conservatives will always disagree and bicker. That's what makes it so interesting to be a conservative. But let's not miss the forest for the trees. We must never let our differences blind us to our common and more noble purpose, which is to conserve the liberating principles of America. Divided, we will lose our country, and we will not withstand the liberal onslaught. United, and only united, we just might save our country and preserve for our children the blessings of liberty. Thank you. God bless you.
It's a great pleasure to be here. It's very good to see in the heartland of America activists concerned about their country, prepared to fight for our liberties. We certainly need it. We live at a time of extraordinary political challenges. Many of those challenges, of course, are issues like health care, the budget, Syria, and many others, as all of you know. Another challenge that we face, of course, is the conservative movement itself. What does it stand for? What holds it together? And the topic that we're talking about now, the kind of libertarian and traditionalist strands of the movement. And while we look at this as being a challenge today, it's important to recognize this is not a new challenge. Go back to the founding of America. We lived at a time where most Americans of the colonies to become a country held a biblical worldview, but they were kind of a motley mix. Some very strong believers, but also thrown in non-believers, deists, dissenters, and others. And they all worked together. And they worked together past those differences to create a new country and a constitution and a republic that they hoped would endure. And they saw the importance both of individual liberty and character in having that republic endure. Go back to the Buckley era. Matt mentioned Frank Meyer. Kind of looking at a conservative movement coming out of the New Deal era through the Cold War, a conservative movement that grew to challenge liberalism and indeed overthrew many of the tenets of liberalism. Frank Meyer was very important. He was so-called fusionism. His legacy lives on today. Gene Meyer, his son, heads the Federalist Society. But Frank was very important, saying we must work together, that both character and virtue are important along with liberty. We must bring those together. It was embodied by Ronald Reagan. In 1975, in an interview, Ronald Reagan declared, "I believe the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism." Now, he went on to cite differences. He said, I have some problems on some of those issues. But he added, "I stand by my statement that I think that libertarianism and conservatism are traveling the same path." Today, Don Devine, who most of you probably know, a man who served Ronald Reagan along the same administration I worked in, a man who's been active in the American Conservative Union. Don has a new book out, America's Way Back, looking at these issues as well. There's a long concern here of kind of how do we bring the conservative movement together. And I think what both libertarians and conservatives share is a commitment to limited government and individual liberty. And it doesn't really matter, I think, in coming together what our basic theory is. Is it religious or is it secular? Because they really work together in this case. If you're a libertarian and that's your focus, a secular worldview, you believe in responsibility in this life. If you're a Christian or a Jew, you're thinking beyond. You're thinking about the next life. You're thinking about the eternal soul. But there is also going to be responsibility. Both cases see a moral agent who will be held accountable for one's actions. If we look at individuals, recognition of human nature being flawed. Jewish or Christian, you think of original sin. A libertarian probably looks more at Lord Acton's comments. Lord Acton actually was a devout Catholic, but he's famous as a libertarian as well. And he came up with, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And understanding that human beings are tempted by power. So again, we have a sense coming together, human beings are flawed, original sin, and they're tempted by power. That brings them together. There's also a recognition, I believe, that both liberty and virtue are self-reinforcing. It's very hard to have virtue without liberty, without the freedom to make the right choice. But it's also very hard to preserve liberty without virtue. A society in which we don't have character, we don't have virtue, creates extraordinary challenges for government to intervene at every point. I think if you look at both libertarianism and conservatism, on most issues, we come together. The government should be small, it should be limited, it should be constrained. Individual rights should be constitutionally protected. Broadly speaking, it's what Grover Norquist talked about with the leave us alone. Stay away. Let us live our lives. Let us bring up our families. Let us provide for our needs. Let's work in our communities. Leave us alone. The battle for these goals is strengthened if we work together. Think of Obamacare. Expensive, inefficient, destroys individual choice, takes away our opportunity to decide for ourselves the most fundamental decisions on health care. Also destructive of individual conscience and religion, mandating that one must, whatever one's faith perspective, cover procedures one finds sinful. Bring those arguments together, much more powerful. Arguments that all libertarians and conservatives can agree upon. Now, this is not to ignore significant differences that will come between us. This is inevitable. But we have far more in common because we face a common threat, an overarching abusive state. We must work together and promote both virtue and liberty. Thank you.